Hi, welcome to the next episode of Excel in Excel, the learning channel. Continuing with the previous sessions, in this episode we'll talk about the lookup functions. As the name suggests, these functions are used when we want to look up something. So, a typical example would be the typical index of a book. So, when we're looking at an index of a book, we are searching for a particular term, word, or a phrase. So, we look into that. Where? We look into that in the index. So, the phrase that I'm searching for, I look in the index, and from the index I figure out which page number this phrase would be or the page numbers this phrase would be, and then I go to that page. So this is a typical example of a lookup, right? I needed to look up for a particular phrase. Where did I look up for? In the index. And what did I get as a result? The page number. So with that being the background, we have quite a few lookup functions. So today we would look into three lookup functions: the Vlookup, the Xlookup, and a function which has been recently added into this lookup category. Recently means some time back, of course, which is the Xlookup function. So first let us discuss the Vlookup and Hlookup. And we'll do it with an example. So when we talk about the Vlookup or Hlookup, V or H here stands for vertical or horizontal. Therefore, what we are talking of is, when we are talking of Vlookup, we are talking of a vertical lookup, and when we are talking of an Hlookup, we are talking of a horizontal lookup. So let's say we have this table on the top. That is, we have a transaction number, we have a product ID, we have a date of purchase, and we have the data related to these columns. We need to find out what is the rate of the product. And if we find out what is the rate of the product, for example, this particular transaction held on 21st January 24, the product ID was TEC 98762, and the customer had bought 5 units of this. So we need to find out what is the rate. If we can figure out what is the rate, then we can figure out what is the amount. That is, rate multiplied by the units will give me the amount. So therefore I need to figure out what is the rate. But the rate is not given in this table. I have another table. So as you can see, there is a product code and there is the rate. So this is what is our table range, or something that we call as a lookup table. So in this table, we have to search for this TEC 98762, and once we find that, we'll know that the rate is 9800. Then we can put this 9800 here, and then we can figure out what is the corresponding amount, right? Now that is the Vlookup. Why it's Vlookup? So let's understand. So as I said, there is a lookup value. Lookup value basically means that I'm trying to figure out, based on this lookup value, I want to find out the rate. So what is the rate of this product? So I have a lookup value, and then I have a lookup table which I have called it as the table range here. But in other words, we have a lookup table. That means this lookup value we are going to look into at this lookup table. Now whenever we use a Vlookup, Vlookup looks for the value on the first column, always in the first column of the lookup table. Now the lookup table might be a part of another bigger table, doesn't matter. That means before the product code, I might have some other columns. After the rate, I might have some other columns. But in this case, my lookup table is the product code and the rate columns. In a Vlookup, what's required is that the lookup will be done always in the first column. That means if the rate and product code were in interchange column, that means first column was a rate and the next column was a product code, then I would not be able to use Vlookup directly to figure this out. Now therefore, I have a lookup value, now I have a lookup table. So on the formula, as you can see, I have a lookup value, and this table range is the lookup table. Then the question is, in which column do I have the answer? And that is the column index. So the answer that I'm looking for, that means the rate that I'm looking for, is in the second column, right? So the second column is my column from where I'll return the value, and once the lookup value is found in the first column in Vlookup, the return value will of course be the matching value in the particular column. In other words, when we use a Vlookup, we have to give the lookup value, we have to give the range of a or address of a table range, that is the lookup table. We have to give the column index. Now the column index of the first column is 1, second column is 2. That means within the lookup table, okay, within the lookup table, the first column has a column index 1, the second column has a column index 2. If there were another column here, then the column index would be 3. So lookup is always done on the first column vertically. That's why it's called Vlookup, because it is looking vertically. And the column index can be anything. So in this case, the return value is in the second column. But if the return value was in the third column of the lookup table, then the column index could have been 3. We'll see an example and we'll understand it better when we do that. We can also use an Xlookup. Now, whether we use the Xlookup or we use a Vlookup depends on how our lookup table is organized. Now, in this case, this brown table, the brown box that I have drawn here, the lookup table was organized in such a way that the lookup values were in a vertical way. That means it was in a column. However, if the lookup value is in a row, in this case, as you can see, the product code is given in the first row and the rate is given in the second row. So in that case, what I'll have to do is I'll have to look up in the first row, no longer in the first column, but in the first row. In this case, we use a Xlookup. This stands for horizontal lookup, right? This stands for a horizontal lookup. And just like the vertical lookup or Vlookup, in the horizontal lookup also, we'll first give the lookup value, which remains the same, that is text 0198762, the red one. Then we have the table range. In the table range is the lookup table, this brown dotted line table, that is my table range. The row index. Now the first row in the lookup table has row index 1, second row has row index 2. If there was a third row, it would have a row index 3, and so on and so forth. Now in this case, my row index of course will be in this, and therefore I'll give a 2. Mind you, the column index and row index are numbers, they are not addresses, they are just numbers. In other words, in the Vlookup, my return value was in the second column, so the column index was 2. In the Xlookup, my return value is in the second row, and therefore my row index is also 2. Just like the Vlookup, this Xlookup, this table that I had talked about, this table might have had other rows on before it and other rows after it, but my lookup range is, the lookup table is what is given by the brown line, that is just these 2 rows in this case. And lastly, there is a lookup range. The lookup range basically asks us how the lookup needs to be made. For example, when we are looking at text 98762 and we are using a Vlookup and we are searching for it, the question is, are we looking for an exact match? Now in this case, of course, we are looking for an exact match, but then there can be a scenario where we are looking for an approximate match. So range lookup basically talks about that. So what we will do is we will work out with an example and see how this works out for us, right? So let's change to Excel and work this out. So let us look at in this Excel worksheet. So what we have the same data as we just discussed. So we have these transaction numbers, we have the product IDs, we have the date of purchase. I want to figure out what is the rate. Now, since I have different product IDs in this place, what I can do is I can match these product IDs in this case and I can figure out the rate from here, right? And therefore, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the rate here, and so my formula would be Vlookup. Now what is my lookup value? Remember that red box that I had made. So this is my lookup value. And what's my lookup table? This is my lookup table, right? We had done that before. So this is my lookup table. We had seen it in the slide before. Now, what I'll do is I'll make this lookup table as absolute. That means the address, I make it absolute. That is $i$6 colon $j $10. I make it absolute because this formula I'll copy it down and lookup table will always be the same. This is the same lookup table. Or let me not, if I don't make it, so let us look into this Excel sheet now, and we have, as we had seen some time back, we have the transaction number, product ID, the date of purchase, the rate, the number of units is of course given, and I would calculate the amount and the discount. We'll see that later. Now for the rate, we have to figure out this product ID, and based on this product ID, in this particular table, I'll have to figure out what is the corresponding rate. So this is my lookup table now. Therefore, let me write the formula Vlookup. This is my lookup value. Previously we had put it in a red box if you remember. And then this is my lookup table. And then the column, as we had discussed some time back, it is the second column which is the value. So I'll give number 2 as the column index. And finally, I want an exact match, so I'll select an exact match from there, which is false. True basically means that it is an approximate match, and false means it's an exact match. In other words, approximate match is false. So we put that, and therefore we get this 9800. Okay, let me format it in the currency symbol. Maybe make it a little bigger so that we can see that value. Right. Now, therefore, I have got this, and as you can see from here, for take 0197 it was 9800, and that 9800 is there. Now what you can do is we can copy this down. But then we got an NA. When do we get an NA? We get an NA when this particular product ID that I am looking for, in this case that is the lookup value, is not found in the first column of the lookup table. If the lookup value is not found in the first column of the lookup table, you would get a NA, that is not available. Now this is a very common message that comes in a lookup scenario. It is not an error. It basically tells me that the value is not found, right? So there are many times, maybe you are looking for something here, maybe you are looking for a product code which does not exist as a product code here, and therefore it could not find, and therefore you would have an NA in this case. However, the question is, why did I get an NA? This was very much up there in front. So why did I get an NA? Let's investigate. Now if you see the formula, see what has happened to my lookup table. My lookup table has become, if you look at the formula here, let me open this formula again. See, what is the lookup table now? I8 to J12, the red one, I8 to J12, and I8 to J12 is here. So it has come down, and this take 01 is no longer within this table range. Now this has happened because when I wrote this formula, I did not make the lookup table absolute, and therefore as I dragged it down, the formula using the relative addressing went ahead changing the value. So therefore, let's do one thing. Let's make this absolute and then copy the formula once again. Now therefore, as you can see, I have got all the values out here, right? The same logic goes with an Xlookup. If my lookup table was not arranged column wise, but was arranged row wise like this, right? If it was arranged like this, row wise, in that case, of course, I would have done a very similar thing, but I would have used a Xlookup. And again, the lookup value remains the same, and I will select this. That is my lookup table. As we discussed last time, we are going to make it absolute. So let me make it absolute. And then the row index, that is it is the second row in my lookup table which has the return value. So I put 2, and again it is an exact match. So let's keep it like this. If you notice one thing, I did not make B3 absolute, because as I copy it down, B3, which is currently the take 0198762, when I copy this formula to the next row, my product ID will change. It will become FMCG 0208615, and therefore I kept it relative, so that when I copy it down, right, when I copy it down at this point, as you can see, the lookup value has changed, but the lookup table has not changed, because I had made it absolute, and therefore there it is. And let me copy it all the way down. So that's the idea behind the Xlookup and Vlookup with an exact match. Now the question comes, what is approximate match? So now let's look at the discount. So the question is, we want to calculate the discount. Now the discount here, let's assume that the discount is based on the amount that one spends. So if somebody has spent 22,000, then there would be some discount, and if somebody has spent 34,000 or 49,000, the discount will be some other thing. But then, since this amount can be anything, for example, somebody might have bought 22,100, somebody might have bought 22,300, somebody might have bought for 22,900. Now, the discount cannot be given for each and every amount. Normally, when we have discount, we have ranges like this. So in this case, what we are saying is that if the amount is between 0 and less than 20,000, then there is no discount. If the person purchases between 20,000 and less than 30,000, then the discount is 2%. And if the person purchases between 30,000 and less than 50,000, then the discount is 4%. And if the person purchases 50,000 or beyond, then the discount is 7%. So I repeat, what we are saying? We are saying that if the person has purchased between 0 and less than 20,000, then the discount is 0%. If the person has bought between 20,000 and less than 30,000, then the discount is 2%. If the person has bought between 30,000 and less than 50,000, then the discount is 4%. And if the person has bought 50,000 or more, then the discount is 7%. So in this case, we use the concept of approximate match. So what we do is, again, this time our lookup value is this 22,000, right? Not the 5, sorry. The 5 came in this box, but it is 22,000. So I have this lookup value and I have the lookup table. But see the difference in the lookup table this time. So what we have done in the lookup table is that we had put the values that I talked about. Between 0 and 20,000, it is 0%. Between 20,000 and 30,000, it is 2%. Between 30% and 50,000, it is 4%. And if it is 50,000 or beyond, it will be 7%. Now, what we need to be very, very aware of, and this is an important flag here, that whenever you are using a approximate match, we normally look at integers or numbers. So we are looking at a match of numbers, and those numbers that is in the lookup table, because we are using a Vlookup. So in the lookup table, the first row, as I said, the first column is the place where Vlookup looks for the lookup value. This must be arranged in the ascending order. If this is not arranged in the ascending order, the approximate match can give erroneous results. So we need to be careful about that. I repeat again, if we are using an approximate match, we need to look into two things. One, how do we arrange the lookup table? So we need to arrange the lookup table that for 0 to 20,000, we are giving a 0% discount. Between 20,000 and 30,000, we are giving a 2% discount. Between 30,000 and 50,000, we are giving a 4% discount. And 50,000 and beyond, we are giving a 7% discount. So it has to be arranged in this way, and the first column in case of Vlookup or the first row in case of an Xlookup must be arranged in ascending order. Now, remaining part of course remains same. So this will be my column index 2, and in this case, because the person has bought 22,000, okay, the discount will be 2%. Now how does this work? It works this way. Now our lookup value is 22,000, right? So in the lookup, in the Vlookup, Excel asks this question: is 0 greater than 22,000? Now 0 is not greater than 22,000, so it comes to the next row where 20,000 is there, and is asked this question: is 20,000 greater than 22,000? Now 20,000 is not greater than 22,000, so it comes to the next level, and it asks me the question: is 30,000 greater than 22,000? The answer is yes, and therefore it goes to the previous row and takes the value in the return column index. Now the column index, if we had given 2, then because 30,000 was greater than 22,000, so it takes the value from the previous one and goes ahead and return 2%. Now if my return value was, for example, 55,000, then it will come here and ask the question: if 0 greater than 55,000, it's not. So it goes to the next row and it asks the question: is 20,000 greater than 55,000? No, it is not. It comes to the next one then, and it asks the question: is 30,000 greater than 55,000? It's not. It comes to the next row now, and it asks the question: is 50,000 greater than 55,000? It is still not. So none of these values out here are greater than 55,000. Then what it does? There is no more space to go. Because there is no more space to go, it settles down for the last value, that is 7%. So if the amount of purchase was 55,000, then the Vlookup in this case for an approximate match would have returned 7%, which is exactly what we wanted. Similar to Vlookup, we can also use the Xlookup. In this case, of course, as we said last time, the lookup table is arranged in rows rather than in columns, and again our lookup value will be in the first row, and by the same logic, the first row must have numbers and they must be arranged in the ascending order for an approximate match. Now that is all that we need to be careful about, and of course then we are again saying that between 0 to 20,000 the discount is 0%, between 20,000 to 30,000 the discount is 2%, between 30,000 and 50,000 discount is 4%, and 50,000 and beyond the discount is 7%. Therefore, in this case also the return value will be taken from the row index, which is the second row. So that's how we use the approximate match. I reiterate once again that whenever you are using an approximate match, the lookup row or the lookup table column, the lookup column in case of Vlookup and the lookup row in case of Xlookup would have numbers and they would be in the ascending order. So let's work on the Excel sheet that we had worked on some time back and see how that works out, right? So let's move there and see how it works out. So we are back into the previous worksheet. Now last time we had already calculated the rate, so we can now calculate the amount, that is rate into the units, and right, let's make it a little bigger, maybe we can make this small, and then we can drag it down so that the values are filled in. Now we'll have to look at the discount and we'll use a Vlookup. So here is my lookup table. As I said, the arrangement is important. So the first column has numbers and they are in ascending order: 0, 20,000, 30,000, 55,000. So as I just mentioned, the first amount is 49,000. So how it will be evaluated? When the Vlookup works, it will ask if 0 is greater than 49,000. No. Is 20,000 greater than 49,000? No. Is 30,000 greater than 49,000? No. Is 50,000 greater than 49,000? Yes. And therefore it will come back to the previous one and take this 4%, and the 4% would be the return value. And therefore let's look at this Vlookup. This is my lookup value and this is my lookup table. We make it absolute as we had understood before, and our return column index is 2, and this time we are going to make a approximate match. Now sometimes what happens is we forget to actually give this and we close the bracket here. If we close the bracket here, it will work. It will work because by default the match is taken as approximate. But if you are looking for an exact match and if you forget to give false out here, you might have repercussion for that. You might get wrong answers. So it is a good habit to ensure that you always provide this value. And therefore, as you can see now, as I can drag it down, you see for each of them I had got the right discount percent. So for example, it was 23,596. 23,596 is between 20,000 and 30,000. So the discount would be 2%. There were no number which is greater than 50,000, and therefore we have not got any 7%. If we look at this, it is 16,540. Now that is between 0 and 20%. So the discount is 0%. If we increase one, let's say we make it 7. We make the unit 7 here. We are still at 44,000. Let's make it 9. Yeah. So moment we made it 9, this amount went beyond 50,000, and as you see rightly, the rate of interest is coming as 7%. Of course, it is given as number. If we change the thing into percentage, you will possibly see that those values are coming in percentage. The same thing can be done if you are using an Xlookup. So let's do the same thing here. So let's multiply this with the units from what we had done before, right? Again, let's make this smaller. Maybe we can make this also a little smaller, and then let's fill up the column. And now here is my lookup table for approximate lookup, approximate match. So again, I have my amount values in the first row, right? And they are numbers and they are arranged in ascending orders, and the corresponding values are there. So between 0 and 20,000, 0% will be the discount. Between 20 and 30,000, 2% will be the discount. Between 30 and 50,000, 4% will be the discount, and 50,000 and beyond, 7% would be the discount. So let's do that again. So equal to Xlookup this time. This is my lookup value, and this is my lookup table, right? This is my lookup table. Sorry, this is my lookup table. Let's make it absolute, and my return row is number 2, and as I said, it's a good practice to write 2 out here. That is true for approximate match, and again we get the result as we would have expected to get. So again, the logic is very simple. The same way it has calculated. So the amount was 49,000. So what it did was it looked at the question: is 0 greater than 49,000? No. Is 20,000 greater than 49,000? No. Is 30,000 greater than 49,000? No. Is 50,000 greater than 49,000? Yes. So it comes back to the previous column and gives the return value. If instead of 49,000 it would have been 55,000, then if we had asked this question like before, is 50,000 greater than 55,000? No. But then there is no more place to go, so it will take the last value and return that, and therefore we have the result here. Now that is how we use Vlookup and Xlookup. But then there is a limitation of Vlookup and Xlookup. In case of an Xlookup, for example, let's say there were some more data out here. Okay, let me copy this. Let's say there were some more data here, but for Xlookup I could have still selected this as my lookup table. In an Xlookup, the lookup values, the values that will be looked up will always be in the first row of the lookup table. But what happens if my data was like this? If my data was like this, then as you can see, in this case Xlookup will not work, because if this becomes my lookup table, okay, if this becomes my lookup table, then the first row does not contain the lookup value, that is the amount. So in the first row, I do not see the corresponding values for the amount, and therefore this will not work. The same thing happens with the Vlookup. In a Vlookup also, if amount was here, then I won't have been able to use the Vlookup, because if this is my lookup table, the first column must contain the value in which the lookup value will be looked at, and therefore this becomes a limitation, or if I can say a challenge of Vlookup and Hlookup. Now, depending on how your lookup table is arranged, you might be able to use a Vlookup, you might be able to use a Hlookup, or you might not be able to use either of them, because as I just explained, the first row or the first column does not contain the lookup values. What do we do in that case? So as I said, in such case, what we can do is we can use the Xlookup. So in Xlookup, I still have a lookup value, I have a lookup table, but I don't have a really lookup table, I have a lookup array and a return array. So I have a lookup array and I have a return array. So let's see what happens this time. What happens here is this, that when I am looking at this lookup value now, and I want the rate to be returned, now here you see that my lookup array, the column in which I look up, is not on the left side of the rate. Rather, rate is on the left hand side, and the lookup array, that is the column in which I look up, is on the right hand side, and therefore I can't use a Vlookup. So in this case, we would use a Xlookup, where this becomes the lookup array and this becomes the return array. Sorry, I made a mistake. I wrote it return index, but it will be return array. So here I have the lookup array and I have the return array, and therefore in Xlookup, I am not limited by where the lookup values are and where the return values are. If the values were arranged in rows, I could have still used Xlookup. In that case, of course, instead of selecting a column, I would have selected a row for my lookup index, and I would have selected another row for my return index. And they can be in any position. They can be on the right or the left, they can be on the top or they can be below, and it doesn't really matter. So therefore, if we are using an Xlookup, we can overcome the limitation of the Vlookup and Hlookup that we had mentioned some time back. We have the lookup value, we have the lookup array, we have the return array, not found. Now what is this not found? It is optional though. We have realized some time back that if in the lookup table the lookup value is not found, we got a not available or #NA error or a #NA value. In this case, if the value is not found, it will still give a #NA value. But if you don't want #NA value to come, but you want to give your own message, then you can write it against the not found out here. The match mode. The match mode is basically what happens if the exact match is not found. So you can look only for an exact match, or you can look for an exact match or the lesser value, the next lesser value, that means, or you can look at an exact match or the next higher value. In a search mode, the search mode is basically how does the search happen? Does it happen from top to bottom or bottom to top? Or have you arranged the data, arranged these values in ascending order or in descending order? So depending on that, you can also have a binary search, but let's not go into those details in this case. So what we'll therefore do is, we'll again go into Excel and see how this works out. So just once again, we use an Xlookup when we want the flexibility to use any row or a column as my lookup array and any other column as my return array, so that I'm not stuck with the first column versus second column. The leftmost column should be the lookup value, and so on and so forth. So if I don't want those restrictions, I would go ahead with this. So let's go to Excel and try this out. So now let's look into this scenario. I want to figure out what is the rate. But this time, as we said, the rate will be looked in this column while the values returned will be from this column, and because they are the product code is not on the left hand side of the rate, but rather rate is on the left hand side of product code. So we can't use a Vlookup, and therefore we will use a Xlookup. So in the Xlookup, this is our lookup value as before, but this time my lookup array is this. We'll make it absolute, and then I need a return array. This is my return array because I want to return the rate. Again, let's make it absolute, and the other values are optional, so let me ignore it for the time being, and there we are. So therefore we had got this value as 9800, which we know is correct because we have done this multiple times, and now I can put it all the way down, and so in each of the cases, as you can see, my lookup value now has changed because this was relative address B13, B3 has become B13, B3 was the value in the first row when we wrote the formula. So B3 has become B13. However, as you can see, because we had made this absolute, the product code and the rate columns are selected as we had done initially. So that's basically how we use the Xlookup. Now if just for the sake of one more thing, let's say I make this as 3. In that case, of course, as I told before, we get the NA that is not available. Now here what happens is that I get an option to give a if not found, what is to be done. So I can actually give a value 0, for example. In that case, as you can see, because it was not found, it just gave a 0, and in my formatting it is a, if the value is not there, that is a 0, it just gives a hyphen, and so this hyphen has come in. So therefore you can also use this option to avoid an NA. So we can do this to avoid an NA. Let me get back to the previous one. That's what we had done before, right? If we use Xlookup that we had used, or if we use Vlookup as we would have used here, if the value is not found, then we will get into an NA, and to overcome the problem of NA, as we had seen in one of our previous episodes, we can use if error to trap that out. So that's how we use the Vlookup, Xlookup and Hlookup. All these 3 functions we can use for lookup. But what happens if we have a scenario like this? Let's say this is a scenario for hotel booking. So depending on the room, single, double, regular, deluxe, presidential suite, and depending on the season, I might have different rates around. So between 1st June till end of August, say a single regular cost me 6,000. Between 1st of September to up to end of November, the same room cost me 7,000. Between 1st of December and till 1st of March, let's say it cost me 7,000, and from 1st of March and beyond, it cost me 9,000. Now in this case, when we do a lookup, notice that we actually need two things to look into, because our rooms might be different. So I have to look up for the room. Which room am I looking for? So I might be looking for a junior suite, and I might be looking it for 5th September. In that case, this is the value that I'm looking for: junior suite and 5th September, which is beyond 1st September. So I'm looking at 12,000 rupees here, right? But in this case, as you can see, I have two lookup values. One is the type of accommodation and the other one is the date. So there are two lookup values based on which I realize that I have to spend a particular amount for the room. Till now, in Vlookup, Hlookup and Xlookup, we looked at only one single lookup value. Now what happens if there are two different lookup values? If there are two different lookup values, we will have to handle it in a little different way. And that's what we'll cover in the next episode of Excel in Excel. So till then, thank you and keep learning.